The medium of paper mache. It's a relatively simple one that's fairly accessible with simple tools and simple materials and a flexibility to the recipe as well as the things that you make with it. You can be as free form with it as you want or as rigid and precise. So what I'm doing here is I am going to build a three-dimensional letter, a letter F for Fimbel Lab, a prop of sorts, I guess kind of like a keepsake. So what I'm doing here is I am laying out the letter F on this Cheerio box. I'm not being terribly precise or measuring much here. I'm mostly kind of eyeballing things and being a little bit freeform with it. So here you can see that I have a normal pair of scissors. This kind of cardboard cuts really easy with a normal pair of scissors. And at this point I am transferring my original layout over to the back side of the box. Here I do a little bit of measuring, but I actually use the scraps from the cutoff of the front side of the box to transfer measurements over to the back side. It's a fairly simple process. Whenever possible, I like to avoid measuring because it goes a little bit faster this way. But if I need to be precise, I would measure. This doesn't really call for that. But the scissors do a good job of cutting up this cardboard. Once I finish cutting out the shape, I sort of tape the box back together, taping the flaps down with painter's tape. What I'm going to do next here is kind of interesting. I'm using the scrap piece from the front side of the cut to cut pieces that go in between the flaps of the kind of sticks of the F. And by using the scrap piece, I already have a piece that is precisely folded so that the shape itself will be the correct thickness all the way around. This is another simple way of kind of saving time. I could fold other pieces of scrap to do the same purpose, but I already have a piece of scrap that I can use that's pre-made. So here I am cutting up the pieces and taping them in place to generate some structure. So one thing I've done here is giving some structure to the box, but still leaving some gaps to show that the paper mache can really fill gaps. So here I have a few different types of paper, some newspaper, some printer paper, some copy paper, and right now I think I have some newsprint. So newsprint is essentially the paper that newspaper gets printed on. It's also inexpensive drawing paper. This is my old sketch pad here. I don't know why I did it in this order, but I'm just kind of showing how the papers rip. So when you make paper mache, you want to rip up the paper and use it as smaller chunks of paper. The newsprint, one thing that people don't often recognize is that paper actually has a grain to it, similar to wood, like a wood grain. And right there I was ripping along the grain for the strips, and you'll see here with the newspaper I try to rip it against the grain and it doesn't work out that great, so now I'm ripping it with the grain. So I'm prepping up a few different kinds of paper. What I like to use for paper mache is the newsprint, but newspaper works well. Any paper really can work well for paper mache. So there's three different types here. You can really use anything. Now I am going to make some simple paste. There's a lot of different recipes for making paste for paper mache. One of the simplest ones is basically just flour and water in roughly a 50-50 mix. So I think here I made, so I have about a cup of water and about a cup of flour. I think pretty much any kind of flour will do. Right now I used kind of warm water and it's not mixing together very well. It's kind of really clumpy and lumpy. So I've decided to heat it up a little bit with a microwave. Not much, just 22 seconds. And that helps kind of break up the flour some and make it into a paste. We're looking for kind of a consistency that's a liquid but has some body to it. I'm adding some more water here. And one key ingredient you'll see in just a moment right here is that I'm adding some salt, regular table salt to this. So flour and water, if it's just the flour and water paste, it can kind of generate some mold as it dries, or if you are going to be working on this project for instance, multiple days, you can put this in the fridge and save the pastes. Right here you can see the consistency of the paste that I kind of like. Still have some lumps in there, but I kind of like a little bit of a soupier paste. Really, people kind of find their own consistency that they like and tailor their recipe for it. So I am showing that you can put this in the fridge and save it for later. This is actually my preferred method of making paste with flour. Essentially, I am going to warm up some water on the stove, and this method uses a lot more water. So it's about 5 parts water to 1 part flour, and pretty much just heat up the water and get the water to the point where it first starts boiling and mix up the flour into it. And what this does, so adding some salt there, again to prevent any kind of mold from happening. And it also kind of increases the shelf life. You can see this is after simmering for a little while how kind of gloppy this paste is. I really like the how smooth the consistency of that paste is. So here I have my prepared paper and my prepared paste and my prepared form. And pretty much just taking ripped pieces of paper and coating them with the paste. I bet many of you have probably done this. This is actually a fairly simple project that is often done with school-age children. And one thing that's really, I feel like the paper mache medium is often overlooked as a way of making some inexpensive, simple 3-dimensional forms. You can work really large with this stuff, and it's very user-friendly, really. So as you can see, I am displaying how you can use the paper mache to kind of fill gaps, and how I'm using the paper mache to bridge those big gaps there. And the paper itself gives, as it dries, it'll give some structure to this form. Right now I'm coating the whole piece in newspaper. Because I'm going to be painting this, it's nice to cover, so if I were to paint this form with just the newspaper, a lot of the print would kind of bleed through the painting, and I would have to paint it a number of times. So this first coat here is really just kind of a rough coat. It's advised that you try to keep the layers less than 4 layers thick, or else you might run into some issues with drying time, as far as the moisture not wanting to kind of leave the paper mache evenly. So I'm kind of crisscrossing the layers here so that it adds some structure. The grain of the paper will add some structure, and the paste, I'm essentially kind of making almost like a plywood, if you will, out of paper. And this is still the roughed draft here as I'm going in very high speed, fast forward. Just covering every surface here so that it's going to be an even coating of the paper and paste. So this is an even coating of paper and paste. So that's the first coat, all done, kind of even layers all around. And then what I want to do is I want to put one last coating of just the newsprint. So this is, again, newspaper that doesn't have any printing on it. And what that does is that helps give a nice clean base for paint, essentially. So it's totally reasonable for somebody to make paper mache and leave it as newsprint or newspaper printing, just the regular newspaper showing. If that's what you want, that's totally fine. But what I'm after is a painted surface. So this is kind of almost like priming the piece, getting it ready for paint by giving it one last smooth coating of just kind of clear unprinted paper. I find that the newsprint is a little bit more flexible than the copy paper. The copy paper can be a little bit stiff. And right here, I'm going to let it dry fully for 24 hours. So now I'm going to dip into our crafts cabinet in the general workspace, and I'm going to grab some paint. So we stock that craft cabinet with all sorts of supplies that when you make it back to campus, you're welcome to come in and grab and work on your own projects. So I've put down some paper to work on here, and I am simply just going to paint this F here. This is an acrylic paint, so it's a very friendly water-soluble paint that you have to be a little bit careful about how thick the paint is. If you have it a little bit too thick in some spots, it dries a little bit darker than in other spots. So I'm just going to try to give it a nice even coat. And you can see on those spots where the paper created kind of like a bridge, it wasn't exactly perfect as far as being fully square, but it definitely did the job. The paper mache portion of this project is effectively done, and right now I'm just giving it a nice blue paint job. So I let that dry fully, and now I flipped it over and I'm going to paint the other side of the F. So that is essentially a paper mache letter for Fimbel Lab.